solution of all possible combinations of the classical states. So if you had, say if you had a n-bit computer, that would have 2 to the n possible states. But an n-qubit quantum computer, the states can be any combination of those 2 to the n classical states. Okay, so that's cool. And what's mind-boggling to me about this is that a quantum computer is able to process all of these combinations, all these states, in parallel. And that brings a problem, right? Okay, so your quantum state is right now this combination of all sorts of things, including the answer you want. How do you get the answer out? And that uses a phenomenon called interference. So you design your quantum algorithm to create interference patterns that amplify the answer you want and cancel out the answers you don't. And then you measure it, and then somehow you get the right answer. At least magic. And actually, you don't get the right answer because quantum computers have high error rates at this point. So we're working on quantum error correction and ways to reduce the error rate. Until we get there, they're not going to be very useful for practical applications. But as they say about about cold fusion, right? Just 20 years. Okay. So what are some possible applications? It's important to remember that quantum computers, even if we do get them to work, are not going to replace all computers. You're not going to run your web server. Apache web server is not going to be running on a quantum computer. It's useful for specialized applications, often, I think, sort of linear algebra flavored or things that are quantum flavored, like drug discovery, material science. Cryptography is a big one, right? That's what causes the most interest, because if we can get large error-corrected quantum computers working, it will break RSA. So it'll break the internet. And so this is not a talk on quantum computing, though. This is supposed to be a discussion. I want to hear what you're interested in, what you know about it, what you're doing in the quantum space, et cetera. So I think I will stop here. If you're interested in participating in the quantum computing meetup group, we do have a QR code that links to a Google form, and you can fill out the survey. And that's my presentation. And any questions? We can move the mic around.
I think what we're hoping is to have a significant amount of audience participation in this. Because it's a new group, it's a revived group, and because the point of the group is to build community, right? This is a community forming exercise today, more than it is a presentation of quantum computing. And I hope that was clear from our description. I think, the survey that we have here is basically interest survey. What kinds of activities you'd like to see if you were to participate in a quantum computing group, interest group. So activities to get to know other people who are also interested in this. But let me just ask people, does anybody here have a background in physics? Great. Okay, does anybody consider themselves to be an expert in quantum mechanics?
All right.
I'm going to...
Particle physics, 2008-ish.
Okay. All right.
And then gravity after that.
Great, I'm going to put you on the spot. And what's your name?
Stephen Dorsher.
Okay, welcome. And what was your area again?
Particle physics in 2008. I transferred to gravitational waves after that, and then after that, numerical relativity. I did some exoplanets before that. I have 3 master's degrees.
All right. Wow. And so what is your specific interest in this area?
Right now I'm working as a part-time tutor. I have a disability. I'd love to transition to data science, but quantum computing sounds cool too. I don't actually know the math behind quantum computing real well. Like obviously I know quantum field theory, second quantization, but I'm a little bit confused about how that works with like what it means to have two particles together that are entangled with two other particles versus what it means to have four particles entangled. Like what would a Feynman diagram with two particles interacting that produce two other particles be versus what it means to have two particles entangled that are interacting with two particles?
I see. Okay, interesting. So, so there's a gap here between quantum field theory, which involves, like, I believe, infinite calculations over an infinite number of states in
Right.
in the state space, and quantum computing, most of the situations seem to be finite.
Right, and what sort of distance they're interacting over too typically, and what speeds they're moving at.
Right, so when you're
Okay.
doing quantum computing or quantum information theory, I guess you've sort of simplified you're really doing linear algebra over finite dimensional vector spaces. So the math requirements are not as formidable as you might think.
Yeah.
So I saw a couple of other people here. I'm going to make my way back.
Oh, yes.
Hi, what's your name?
Derek Lee.
Which one?
Yeah, actually a little bit kind of similar story.
Oh, the upcoming
was,
speakers, yes.
Pursuing theoretical particle physics and
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
gravity. I was a PhD student in that and decided I didn't care for the academic life. So currently data architect over at the health department right now. But yeah, similar kind of story of a lot of background in field theory and particle physics. I'm guessing that you do a lot of calculation of density matrices and things like that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, cool.
Would you want to say something about what a density matrix is?
Oh, it's rather than just a pure quantum state, it is like in classical mechanics. You also have density matrix calculations because you have things at a finite temperature. So it ties into, like, you can do finite temperature field theory and quantum mechanics as well. So this is probably like I'm guessing this is a finite dimensional reduction of finite temperature field theory. So that makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I mean,
Yeah.
my understanding is fairly basic, but I think often a quantum state is represented as a state vector, complex numbers in multiple dimensions. I think if you have n qubits, typically the state vector has 2 to the n complex entries and is formed by something called a tensor product, which every time I read about it, it sounds scary, but when I worked through the calculations, it turned out to be actually pretty straightforward. If you're familiar with lexicographic ordering, you can understand how to compute a tensor product.
Is that similar to time ordering?
I do not know. I think, what is time ordering?
In quantum field theory, I'm a little foggy on this, it's been since 2008, but it's the thing that causes it to expand in an approximation that's a little,
If I may, it's called the Dyson time ordered approximation.
okay.
It's similar to the Kronecker
Dyson,
product of matrices.
Resolution to how you deal with sequencing, right, in the field
Yeah,
interactions.
exactly.
So I'm a high energy particle physicist from the University of Minnesota. I got my degree on the Sedan 2 experiment, which is an experimental proton decay search that ran up in the Sedan mine in the, I think it ended in about 2000, and then it was followed by Minos, which was the first neutrino, long baseline neutrino experiment. So I had some great professors at the University of Minnesota here, and I have a long-term interest in this. A few years ago, I listened to Mikhail Dyakonov at the colloquium, right, the University of Minnesota School of Physics and Astronomy colloquium, who was a quantum critic, right? He is one who has very explicitly put out a number of serious calculations. This guy is considered the father of spintronics, by the way. He has put out calculations that suggest that it is impossible to realize a true quantum computer. And while I was there, he was interrupted by some of the younger professors that had come into the department, and it was kind of an interesting discussion. So since then, I've been compelled to probe the question. I think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of promise, but I think it's overpromised at this point, and there's a lot of hard work before we get there.
And what was your name?
Garrick Viome.
Okay, thank you, Garrick. I've heard a lot of similar things. I think, you know, the things that you look at, you know, on the one hand, hundreds of small startups. I think David and I went and did a little bit of research, and we saw a couple of lists, one of which said that there were 280 startups in this space right now. But on the other hand, there have been a lot of stories about things like Microsoft's attempt to build Majorana particle-based quantum computing, which is, so one of the things with quantum computing that is difficult is you are dealing with extremely tiny, hard to work with devices, particle physics, essentially, quantum mechanics, it turned into engineering. And so the states, the quantum states, are created using combinations of photon polarization or the orbitals of an atom, the spin of a nucleus. There are many different technologies out there that people are using to try to build qubits. These qubits all have different properties. One of the key properties is coherence time. Simply how long does the state that you want stay in place before the natural action of the universe causes things to get disrupted, right? So we're all familiar probably with the idea that cosmic rays can screw up some bits in your RAM. That's why we have error correcting RAM. Quantum computers have this in orders of magnitude worse problem with this right now, to the point where it is difficult to get them to perform a calculation of more than a few dozen steps. So one of the key goals in quantum computing is error correction. There is a collection of results in the space that say that you can create virtual qubits by out of a larger number of qubits. So essentially, there's a result by Shor, I think, who proved that you can, if you have 1,000 physical qubits, you can arrange them in a way that creates effectively 100 logical qubits, and then you can run your calculation on those logical qubits. And the redundancy that is built into the encoding scheme gives you robustness that you don't have from the individual qubits. And that error correction process, there's a large subfield of quantum computing called error correcting codes. And error correcting codes exist in many other applications, but in particular, quantum error correcting codes are the thing that I think people are mostly leaning on for the hopes that this will become a robust technology. But there are caveats there. I think we have to have over 99.9% fidelity over a certain time period in order to get the error correcting code schemes to work. Now, I think if you follow this space, every few weeks you see a new result from somebody talking about the coherence time of their particular qubit system. That you see a lot of that coming out of the different kind of groups like IBM, Google, Honeywell. Honeywell has a spin-off called Quantinuum that actually was founded here in Minneapolis. It's the largest thing that I know of in terms of quantum computing efforts in this area. But maybe some of you have heard something else. So does anybody else have familiarity with quantum initiatives that are going on in this area, in St. Paul, Minneapolis, or the upper Midwest? Okay.
Yes, but not so that I could explain them.
Okay. Do you have names or groups or?
Names, no, but I've been reading about it.
I think there's a quantum computing program, I forget the name, at Madison?
Like,
In physics?
yeah, I would recognize them if I heard them, but that's
Okay.
not the best. Yeah.
What was the question?
What are some, are you familiar with quantum computing initiatives in the Midwest?
Well, there are a few, right? And this
Yeah.
is why Darren Klum, right, is a colleague or connection, right, or associate as well. And he and I have lamented a number of times that how we've lost touch with the computing roots, right, that were deep in this area, as exemplified, for example, in the movie Solid State. Like the brief little story of history of control data that talks about C8's eventual acquisition of the disk drive business, which is where I worked for a number of years, right? But as far as I can tell, there's nothing serious happening here on a commercial level apart from the Honeywell spin-off plus merger, right? It merged with Cambridge Quantum or whatever that they were called, and they
Yeah.
were working on algorithms and software development aspects to go with the ion trap technology that Honeywell was doing. From a personal, where I place my bets, I'm really big on photonics, right, for the long run, right? But I don't see anybody doing that. I don't see anybody in the traditional tech data storage world, in the foundations, right, that came from, or that rose here, that led to Seymour Cray's whole career, right, and everything he produced. And so one of the reasons I'm here is to explore ways to maybe catalyze that and initiate that, but to do it in a long view, deliberate approach, right, and to associate with some of the researchers at the University of Minnesota, a few with whom I'm familiar, and I mentor undergraduates there, and so it's an obligation, right, to kind of keep up on this, even if I didn't have a personal interest. And I think the biggest connection we should try to make is to the stuff around Argonne and University of Chicago and the network they're doing there, and ask why aren't we making the next link, right, to here in the Twin Cities. So that's my 2 cents. And
Right. Yes.
I'm Harrison. Intellectually, in this space, I'm an infant, but I have a finance backing. And I can tell you why SPACs have rendered a few of our publicly traded companies that are interested in this space into penny stocks, essentially. And I'm just going off what was just said, looking at how we can create not just a capital investor base, but an overall interest investor base in the much more longer term initiatives that need to be made. And then also knowing that a lot of this technology and theoretical work comes from universities, how the destruction of capital has maybe put pause, or how they're approaching technology transfer into the private space. I don't think that we're all done and over, but just maybe a bit of a reset and how people like myself can get more involved and create just more awareness around that.
Harrison, do you want to say something about SPACs for anyone who's not familiar with what a SPAC is?
Yeah, a SPAC is a special acquisition company. It is a way to go public without going through a traditional IPO process, which is expensive, but also can create a lot more capital within the company. The investors, the founders, will be rewarded with some liquidity, and then of course all public markets can trade it. But in the underwriting process, you go through very lengthy, the SEC, our regulators, they make sure that what you're selling is what you're selling and that you're not putting together a Ponzi scheme. With a SPAC, the company's already public. They're called blank check companies. They go out and they say, here's $100 million, we're going to buy a company. And we saw SPACs across all different spaces, and a lot of it was very deep tech that is absolutely very interesting, but has almost no day one use case that can be effectively monetized. And so they're also structured very poorly. Typically, the people who set them up, their capital has a much lower buy-in rate, so they're not as concerned about the near term. They'll be profitable if you see a 50% drop in the share price, whereas the people, public investors, may buy in at a much higher rate. Just for instance, like if you know the company D-Wave, they SPAC'd, so the share price started out at $10, and in a year it's dropped down to about 50 cents, and that's because people who are buying it, typically retail investors, see the words quantum computing, think it's very interesting, which I think is very valid. They don't realize the mechanics of the business are absolutely destructive in the day-to-day operating of how they're financing what they're buying or what they're trying to sell. So I hope that made some sense.
Right on.
Do you want to see it?
It's just, I mean, I have a very, not a very deep understanding of this, but what it seems like is that quantum computing, they're really like trying to, it's not something that can solve problems right now, they're really just testing the waters, and a lot of companies think that it's something that will get big very quickly, but it's not actually true. And right now, as you said, they have this initiative where you use 1,000 qubits and you can kind of synthesize 100. But even then, it doesn't seem like that's very reliable because they can just deconstruct at the whims of the quantum world. And what this gentleman said over here with photonics, it seems like that is something that might cross those two boundaries of quantum and more general computing, or what the usual idea is. And I think it's just something to look into to cross those lanes, to make it more reliable instead of something that can just be deconstructed so easily.
And what was your name?
Alex Single.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I think we had someone over here.
My name is Sergey, and I am an old computer scientist. Old. So when we started learning computers, it was vacuum tube, and that was electrons coming from this layer to layer, how to heat it, etc. And because I am from science, I'm very interested in computing. But what I see as a problem is this connection between computers itself and quantum theory. And exactly what you just mentioned is this connection between, we are computer guys. We understand you're doing something very, but until somebody like von Neumann come and present architecture, and architecture means we have 5 blocks, central process unit, control unit, memory, input, output, and as a programmer, I understand this and I can program. Because then after the architecture, programming language come, assembler, Fortran, COBOL, C#, etc. And we are programmer computer guys who actually bring money through the practical implementation of what you were just talking about. We need von Neumann architecture and something like understanding how I can write a code in one language, convert it into another, and then I understand multi-value, whatever bit is, what quantum bit, but give me architecture. So that's what my call to all guys from the computer and the quantum world. So to bring us together, computer specialists, computer scientists, programmers, and physics and mathematicians, like a triangle, triage. And probably with the von Neumann help, we can come together.
Can I build on that? So I thought that was excellent, Sergey. And I've been asking for quite a number of years, in a obvious rhetorical sense, what is the bus for a quantum computer look like? Right? And where are we going with regard to interoperability, and how do we talk to the things? And I'm on the side that believes that we are misguided in pursuit of a standalone thing called a quantum computing, except insofar as it's required in the lab to demonstrate that it works. And that what we really need to be thinking about over the many years to come, right, until some future where architecture is something we have yet to be able to conceive, it's a peripheral. Right? It's something that we're going to have to talk to with the existing systems that we have to be of any use to us whatsoever, and that's in fact how it's happening, and that's what Chicago and its loop is doing and all these things. But we get a lot of pom-pom waving and a lot of webinars and info sessions from companies, like D-Wave, right, that are going to tell you that you better have it now, right, or your financial plan is going to fall apart right next year. And I think that's doing us all a disservice right now.
Okay. And what's your name?
I'm Mark Beckman, and I've kind of gone on a roller coaster with quantum computing. I'm not really an expert, not really a novice. Just 20 years ago, I was working for a government contractor, and we were looking at it for some things, this research and everything. And I've been kind of keeping my eye on the technology over the years. One of the things I'm wondering is, are we looking at so photonics? I kind of agree, photonics is the way. What if it's not really silicon, quote unquote, silicon that we should be looking at, rather DNA? There's some really interesting topics research out there that's looking at DNA as a quantum gateway in quantum computing. And when you bring up the peripheral aspect, so our body actually creates photons. It transmits, receives, creates, uses them, as well as chemicals and electricity. I'm wondering if there are already people looking at the body or DNA or the mind already as an existing quantum computer and already developing the peripheral connections for that. Neural link, for instance. Yes. We already have, there's a strong potential that we already have walking around in each one of us a quantum computer or multiple quantum computers. And so we start looking at that neural link. Also what they're doing, say, ETH Zurich with their DNA computation. So if you can bring all this stuff together in one, you might already have something working both classical and quantum.
So there are definitely aspects of the very small in our DNA, and I think the transistors that we already work with are very small, and so we're looking at multiple different ways of seeing different kinds of modalities. Okay, thank you. I think I wanted to say something about the architecture that goes back to something I was saying earlier, that we're sort of in the 1930s, 1940s with this thing. And in particular, there are a number of hardware companies out there that have built their own quantum simulators. And many of them have also provided essentially software APIs, packages. Google provides something called CIRQ, C-I-R-Q, that is a programming language. It's a Python package to interact with their hardware. I believe Microsoft has Q#,
yeah.
which is their quantum programming language. There are Xanadu has the PennyLane API, and they have an active user development community. They have programming hackathons, essentially. And so...
And I think the biggest one is Qiskit, IBM's package.
Yes.
And I should point out, when you're programming a quantum computer, you're not... Most programming for quantum computers is in Python, right? The packages you're using are Python packages that use an API to connect with the quantum device.
But I think to your point about architecture, Sergey, what you are doing when you use those packages is building a circuit. So we are at the, has anybody here done the NAND to Tetris course? I don't know if anyone's familiar with this. It's basically an online course that you can take where you start by simulating NAND gates, and you progress through the architecture of a modern CPU to the point where you can simulate Tetris in your simulated chip. And you do a lot of gate-based programming in the early stages of that course. Gate-based programming is where most of these initiatives are. So I think we're not even at the level of assembler.
Just say a few words about this. When you mentioned the
and you look at DNA from the program point of view, DNA is a program, it's a sequence of codes written by some kind of programmer, who knows who is the programmer, but at least when DNA interpreted by ribosome, I understand it. I have a language in 4 letters, encoded the program, which interpreted by ribosome, and bingo, you get a cell as output of this interpreter. So the process of DNA from the program point of view is clear and fine, and we just don't understand language. We don't understand programmer who coded. We don't understand the logic, and that's what I try to discuss with my friends from genetic science. But it's not about photons, quantums, etc. It's about logic. It's a code. This device has code inside, and somebody wrote it. It's very complicated, but I can go to the programmer and decompose it, and I understand the logic behind it. The same with DNA, because the code interpreted by ribosome. So that's what I call computer. It's not when computer in a Python call another device, which do it the black box, and give me something, this is not a computer. It may be a computer, but for me it's black box. I call it did something in Python, in assembler, I don't care. Because for me, computer is something which interpret my code. And when I get a black box and I understand interpretation, I give up. So that's what my problem is quantum. And that's where somebody called computer, for me, show me the interpreter, interpretation, logic, etc. So until it's a black box,
I see. So if I understand, what you're asking for is an easier way to understand what is a quantum state in the context of computing.
Computer. The keyword is a computer.
The computer. So
Because
what?
we're using computer as a word with a quantum state. So for me, that computer is a 5 blocks von Neumann architecture.
Okay.
That's my problem.
He's saying it's a deterministic automaton, which is not the case, right, in a qubit system, an entangled qubit system.
Sure, but we don't have, I mean, if we just call it a quantum device, right? It's like a GPU, right? It's
So-
a peripheral. It's not maybe a misnomer to call it a computer.
So
That's a point. If you didn't call it computer, I'm fine.
More like just something you.
Bob? Mark, sorry, Mark. So Mark's comments about DNA and thinking about
Yeah.
new ways of conceiving quantum manifestations, right, to me points to what I think is maybe the biggest outcome that we should expect out of today's activity. And it may not be of interest to engineers who are working on commercial applications and so on, but I believe that this is going to open deep insight into the foundations of quantum mechanics. And it already is prying the lid off of a number of cherished beliefs about quantum mechanics. Recent evidence that Bell's theorem is not violated, right, is in fact upheld, right, is powerful evidence that we are still learning, right, what it all means. I'm going to go so far as to say that I will assert that things like having the same thought as somebody, saying the same word at the same time, is a manifestation of entanglement. And that there are behaviors that we have yet to understand in the context of our focus in this micro regime that we're going to end up realizing as we go through this journey. Thanks.
I want to just check the time real quick. We're at about 5 minutes before the session is supposed to end.
He raised his hand.
Over here.
Hey, sorry, backtracking just slightly. I happen to think doing physics with Python is really wonderful. And I also think that from a machine learning standpoint, I'm a beginner with machine learning, absolute beginner, but I think that digital logic and machine learning can be very compatible in terms of how you think about going from one node to another in terms of the logic of progressing from that. I was just considering this in terms of how you would, I've heard of doing machine learning on a quantum computer, and I think that it's obviously implementable because people have done it. But I think that how it's done even can make sense, and that Python can be a good way to do it. I think I could understand that. I don't quite grasp how the quantum aspect of that works, though, because when you have a state that collapses, it's not deterministic. So when it's not deterministic, how do you know you're getting the right result out of it? Like, you know, normally you would think of that either as frequentist statistics or Bayesian statistics. Is it, if it's frequentist, you have to do it many, many trials, but how can that be fast? If it's Bayesian, then you get some sort of likelihood out of it. Or if it's quantum, then you get some sort of probability of a state. I don't quite know what that means in terms of the answer being right. Like,
Can I give you a recommendation?
Yeah.
Do you know who Sabine Hassenfelder is?
absolutely.
Watch her video. She talks exactly about that, and I won't get into it now, but the idea of wave function collapse is misguided, right? It's the wrong interpretation.
Is that related to the last Nobel Prize?
Partly, right, yes, right. So she talks at length about this in relationship to the foundation of quantum mechanics. As you know, she's a critic of what's going on in high energy physics these days.
Yeah.
For damn good reason, I agree with her. Right? Read her book, Existential Physics, right? And then also read the one that was before that, I forget the title of that.
I don't quite understand how that connects to quantum field theory, though, because when you have quantum field theory,
It's about whether there's determinism or not, really.
right, but
what that
is she saying there is determinism?
She believes in determinism, I think is the case that everything is deterministic ultimately. And she will tell you, if I'm not in error in listening to her videos, that the recent validation of Bell's inequality not being violated supports that. So it's a subtle argument, and it's not really right to
Does
get into
that
it here.
support faster than light travel as well?
She recently said that she believes that's possible. I haven't looked at her video yet about that.
Okay, I think we should wrap up pretty soon.
Okay, so what I am hearing from this interaction is that there are a lot of questions about how this technology actually works. And that should probably be a focus of some of the early sessions that we try to set up. So understanding the coprocessor nature, if you will, of this is are we talking about effectively a QPU that would be something that that accelerates things? So I think I've learned something about what people want to know about that we can incorporate into the schedule for the coming year.
Absolutely, and reach out if you'd like to give a presentation. And I think we're over time, so thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.